Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the MacArthur Memorial Podcast. Thanks for joining this evening. As you know, we deal with many subjects on the MacArthur Memorial Podcast that basically fall in line with General MacArthur's career. Tonight, we'll be delving into World War II. And of course, this is the end of World War II. And tonight, we have very happy to have with us James Scott with his new book, Empire of Ashes, Truman, Hirohito, and the Descent into Total War. This book is something that, like I told to Jim Scott before, is the first time that I think I've ever really been sucked into 1945 and felt like I was actually in the room with a lot of these people. And studying all these things for about 30 years, you get to know these people, but you don't really see how they act and move. And somehow this book brings it all together. And so we're very glad to have Jim Scott with us, and we'd like to bring him on right now.
Thanks, Jim. Thanks so much for having me on, and thanks everybody for tuning in tonight and to hear about this. And I'm ready to go, right, Jim? You ready for me to get going? All right. So to begin with, guys, I want to rewind to April 12th, 1945, which is a pivotal day in American history. On that afternoon, in a small clapboard cottage in the hilltop town of Warm Springs, Georgia, 63-year-old President Franklin Roosevelt relaxed in a leather chair by the window so that watercolor artist Elizabeth Shumatoff could paint his portrait, which is pictured here. At 1:15 p.m., the president suffered a massive cerebral hemorrhage. Aides immediately summoned doctors and then carried Roosevelt to his adjacent bedroom, where he held on for 2 hours and 20 minutes, though he never regained consciousness. At 3:35 p.m., he slipped away. This painting, which Shumatoff would never finish, is the last image we have of the nation's 32nd president. Roosevelt's death was a massive blow to the American public, who in the days ahead would line the streets in Washington to say farewell. Now, Roosevelt had served as president for a staggering 4,422 days, time in which he'd helped reshape America and the world. He'd taken the nation's helm in March of 1933 at the height of the Great Depression and the Dust Bowl. More than 4,000 banks collapsed in the first few months of that year, while unemployment soared to 25%. The American Army then ranked 19th in the world, sandwiched between Portugal and Bulgaria. In the years since, and as war enveloped the globe, Roosevelt had helped resurrect America's economy and transform the once isolationist nation into the world's greatest military power, a fact underscored by workers at a single Ford Motor Company plant who cranked out a new B-24 Liberator every 63 minutes. And Germany, in contrast, had suffered an incredible reversal of fortune. The Third Reich, destined to last 1,000 years, at least according to Adolf Hitler, would in the end survive only 12. The German ruler, who had boldly declared war on America 3 years earlier, now lived in a bunker under the smoldering ruins of Berlin, while hungry residents picked through the rubble as the dreaded Russian army closed in on the east. The Japanese had fared little better in the Pacific. The bespectacled Emperor Hirohito, who had once dominated a quarter of the globe, watched as his own cities burned under the nightly raid of incendiary bombs delivered by America's awesome new B-29 super fortresses. Less than 2 weeks earlier, American soldiers and Marines had sloshed ashore on Okinawa, the final stepping stone in the long march toward the enemy's homeland. And in the remote mountains of northern New Mexico, scientists hustled to finalize a top-secret new weapon, one that promised to annihilate cities and at last bring an end to the war. All of this had occurred on Roosevelt's watch, and now he was gone. At 7:09 p.m. on April 12th, 3 hours and 39 minutes after Roosevelt died, Harry Truman officially became president. To Truman, a man who loved bow ties and two-tone shoes, now fell the job of defeating America's enemies and securing the lasting peace, a job few felt he was up to. Quote, "The presidency," declared the Austin American newspaper, "falls upon a minor figure chosen from among minor figures for political considerations." Now, Truman was everything FDR was not. Roosevelt had been born into a world of wealth and privilege, a member of America's aristocracy. He had attended elite schools, spent his summers in Europe, and worked as a Manhattan lawyer before turning to public service. Though Roosevelt had certainly faced adversities, he'd never nursed the callous hands of a farm laborer, felt the fear of a thundering battlefield, or gone financially bust. Truman, in contrast, had experienced all of those things and more. A Missouri native, Truman was a product of rural America, a world comprised of dirt roads and farms and governed by rainfall, frost, and the seasons. His parents lacked the money to send him to college, so after high school, he spent more than a decade toiling on the family farm, where he woke before dawn to milk cows, plow fields, and castrate hogs. As one year bled into the next, Truman watched the sun rise and set each day over a 1 square mile patch of Missouri earth he called home. In 1917, at the age of 33 and desperate for change, Truman enlisted as an artillery officer in the Army. In March of the following year, he shipped out to France to fight. The experience profoundly changed him as the novelty of war gave way to the horror of combat. Surrounded by disinterred and rotting corpses, Truman's mind wandered back to the peaceful green pastures he'd left behind in Missouri. Quote, "If I ever get home from this war hole," he wrote in a letter, "I'm going to be perfectly happy to follow a mule down a corn row the balance of my days." Now, Truman returned in April 1919, where the first thing he did was marry his high school or childhood sweetheart, Bess Wallace, whom he'd met in Sunday school at the age of 6. He looked at last to put life on a farm behind him. Along with an Army buddy, he opened a haberdasher in downtown Kansas City that sold men's shirts, ties, and underwear. Though initially profitable, a recession in 1921 torpedoed his business. His partner declared bankruptcy, but Truman held out, struggling to repay his creditors, a debt that would trail him until 1935, when he finally settled it for pennies on the dollar. This was, he later admitted, a very hard experience for me. The Pendergast family, which was the local political muscle in Missouri, stepped in to rescue Truman at this perilous point, tapping him to run as a county commissioner in 1922. Truman eagerly jumped at the opportunity. He was 38 years old, broke, and about to make a career change that would set this former farmer on a path to becoming the world's most powerful person. Truman served more than a decade as a county leader, where he set his sights on the United States Senate. Elected in 1934, he made a name for himself in Washington for his oversight of the nation's wartime expenditures. That said, his 1944 selection as Roosevelt's running mate stunned the nation at large. That shock was best captured by FDR's chief of staff, Admiral William Leahy. Upon hearing the news, he exclaimed, quote, "Who the hell is Harry Truman?" Now, Truman had served as vice president only 82 days when Roosevelt died, during which time FDR made no effort to educate or prepare him for the job he might face. On April 25th, 1945, 13 days after he became president, he received his first briefing from War Secretary Henry Stimson on the atomic bomb. Quote, "Within 4 months," Stimson said, "we shall in all probability have completed the most terrible weapon ever known in human history. One bomb which could destroy a whole city." Now, the development of the atomic bomb, as Truman learned, had been trusted to none other than Leslie Groves. Groves, who was known for his supersized ego, would have loved the fact that Matt Damon portrayed him in the recent Oppenheimer film. But let's be clear, Leslie Groves was no Jason Bourne. Groves stood 5 feet 11 inches and weighed at times as much as 300 pounds, the byproduct of the chocolate he loved to munch. To hide his bulging physique, he often wore large and heavily starched uniforms and hiked his pants up over his belly. Despite his girth, however, he was a tireless worker, hustling up to 14 hours a day, 6 days a week. Throughout the war, Groves took no vacation or sick days. But the general had a reputation for being difficult. Quote, "Groves not only behaves like he can walk on water," one colleague complained, "he acts like he invented it." People, in short, either loved or hated him, but few could deny the fact that he achieved results. Quote, "He was," as another colleague said, "the only person I have ever known who was every bit as good as he thought he was." Now, to construct the bomb, workers first had to build 3 top secret atomic cities in Tennessee, Washington State, and New Mexico. Each of these cities played a critical role. Scientists in Oak Ridge enriched uranium, while others in Washington manufactured plutonium. Lastly, scientists at Los Alamos were tasked to design and build a weapon. All told, an army of 600,000 workers, not to mention $2 billion, were required for the Manhattan Project. Not only did the government have to build the reactors, processing plants, and laboratories, but workers had to construct power plants and sewer systems, not to mention thousands of homes for this army of scientists, engineers, and technicians. Of the 3 cities, Oak Ridge was the largest, home to 75,000 men, women, and children, making it at the time the 5th largest city in Tennessee. Oak Ridge likewise accounted for half of the project's $2 billion price tag. Despite the town's temporary nature, residents still needed services. A top priority was healthcare. Doctors had to do everything from set broken arms and remove ruptured appendixes to deliver babies. More than 2,800 children were born just at Oak Ridge. And of course, education proved another must, forcing the Army to build schools while administrators recruited teachers from around the country. Cafeterias, restaurants, and lunchrooms, meanwhile, churned out as many as 40,000 meals a day. With so many residents, the demand for commercial enterprises skyrocketed, ranging from grocery stores and pharmacies to typewriter and sewing machine repair shops. You could even buy comic books for a nickel apiece on the atomic frontier. Recreational activities not only helped pass the time, but gave like-minded residents a chance to meet, helping to create much-needed social fabric. To facilitate this, the Army built tennis courts, swimming pools, and ball fields, like the one pictured here in Hanford. Life on the atomic frontier was hard. Any resident would tell you that one of the biggest frustrations was the constant lines. There were lines for security badges and a cigarette ration, and of course, payday. Quote, there was always a line, one resident complained. So the simple process of getting mail and groceries took 2 to 3 hours and a great deal of energy. Compounding the challenge was the weather. Where out at Hanford, temperatures ranged from a negative 18 degrees in the winter to a scorching 110 in the summer. The worst, however, were the dust and sandstorms, that swept the plains. Mud, of course, was another dilemma, particularly at Oak Ridge, where rain in the cooler months turned the earth into soup. Quote, Oak Ridge might be dedicated to manufacturing bombs, one resident later recalled, but dust and mud were the physical elements that went into its making. While workers at Tennessee and Washington enriched uranium and made plutonium, Dr. Robert Oppenheimer led a team of scientists at Los Alamos on the development of the actual weapon. This ranged from determining how to detonate the weapons to the shape of the bombs and the timer mechanisms. And despite a stellar intellect, Oppenheimer was a physical wreck who failed the military's fitness exam. The curly-haired physicist with blue eyes stood 5 feet 10 inches tall, but weighed less than 130 pounds. He preferred cigarettes to food, chain smoking 5 packs of Chesterfields a day, which no doubt contributed to his chronic cough and bad teeth that he used to gnaw on his fingernails. The hustle to build the bomb was set against the backdrop of the war in the Pacific, which reached its violent crescendo in the last year of the conflict. The battles of Peleliu, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa had revealed an alarming change in Japanese tactics. The goal was no longer victory, but attrition and American bloodletting. As such, the Japanese swapped wasteful suicide charges and beach defenses for fortified caves, digging miles of underground defenses. The 11 miles of tunnels carved into the rock of Iwo Jima would jump to 60 miles on Okinawa, forcing Americans to battle yard by yard, often with flamethrowers and flame tanks. Added to the mix was Japan's use of kamikazes. These terrifying monsoons of metal and flesh rained down on American ships. During the Battle of Okinawa, the Japanese executed 1,900 kamikaze attacks that destroyed 36 ships and damaged another 368. To counter this, America launched a campaign to firebomb Japan's cities, beginning with the March 9th, 1945 strike on Tokyo. that burned 16 square miles of the capital and killed 105,000 people. But Tokyo was only the start. By June of 1945, America had incinerated 102 square miles of Tokyo, Osaka, Nagoya, Yokohama, Kobe, and Kawasaki. With Japan's 6 major industrial cities in ruins, American bombers turned to secondary and even tertiary sized cities. On June 18, 1945, as the Battle of Okinawa neared its violent end, Truman met with the Joint Chiefs of Staff to approve the November invasion of Kyushu, Japan's southernmost island. That would be followed by the spring of 1946 by the invasion of Honshu. After Okinawa, few had any doubt about how bloody this fight would be. Nearly 250,000 people died during the 82-day fight for Okinawa, including 107,000 Japanese troops. America suffered nearly 50,000 casualties, including more than 12,000 killed. The United States alone suffered another 26,000 non-battle injuries. The majority of those were combat fatigue, the largest for any single battle in the war. Civilians, of course, paid a tremendous price, with nearly 150,000 killed, a figure that amounted to nearly 1 out of every 3 of the island's inhabitants. Quote, every single person, recalled Major Art Shaw, who survived the battle for Okinawa, knew they were lucky to still be alive. For Truman, who had personally witnessed the horror of war as a young officer in France, ordering the invasion of the enemy's homeland proved an agonizing proposition in the wake of Okinawa. A Pentagon estimate that July predicted an invasion of the enemy's homeland would cost America anywhere from 1.7 to 4 million casualties. Japan, in contrast, could expect to suffer as many as 10 million casualties. Okinawa, in Truman's eyes, had become synonymous with death. Kyushu and Honshu promised to be far worse. His goal, as Truman explained, was, quote, to prevent an Okinawa from one end of Japan to the other. How he might avoid such a fate came into sharper focus during a 5:30 a.m. test in the New Mexico desert of the first ever atomic bomb on July 16, 1945. Quote, there rose from the bowels of the earth a light not of this world, the light of many suns in one, an observer wrote. Quote, it was as though the earth had opened and the skies had split. One felt as though one were present at the moment of creation when God said, quote, let there be light. Truman was meeting with Winston Churchill and Joseph Stalin in Potsdam, in the battered suburbs of Berlin, when news of the bomb's successful test reached him. He met with his advisors before recording his decision to use the bomb in his diary on July 25th, 1945. Quote, we have discovered the most terrible bomb in the history of the world, he wrote. It may be the fire and destruction prophesied in the Euphrates Valley River era after Noah and his fabulous ark. Confirmation of the bomb's success prompted Truman the following day to release a final demand for Japan to surrender, known as the Potsdam Declaration. The full application of our military power, backed by our resolve, will mean the inevitable and complete destruction of the Japanese armed forces, and just as inevitably, the utter destruction of the Japanese homeland, it read. But Japan refused. Headlines worldwide predicted Japan's fate. Hundreds of thousands of Japanese lives now rested in the hands of Colonel Paul Tibbets Jr., a 30-year-old Illinois native who dropped out of medical school to pursue his passion for flying. Japan's rejection of the Potsdam Declaration, coupled with Truman's approval of the atomic bomb, shifted the action from the ruins of Europe to the tiny Pacific island of Tinian, home to the 509th Composite Group. That spring and summer, members of the Target Committee had studied 17 Japanese cities before whittling the list down to just 4. At the top was the city of Hiroshima, home to some 350,000 residents. Unlike so many other cities which America had burned, Hiroshima was largely untouched, a result of its many waterways that served as natural fire breaks and made the city a poor candidate for an incendiary attack. Home to 43,000 troops, Hiroshima was the headquarters for the 2nd General Army and the 5th Division. The city not only featured scores of barracks, administration buildings, and ordnance depots, but the port served as the key point of embarkation for Japanese troops. Quote, Hiroshima, as one intelligence report noted, is an army city. The heart of the city centered on the 4 square miles spread across several islands. 75% of the population crowded in this area, which consisted largely of 1- and 2-story wood homes with a density, as one post-war report noted, comparable to, quote, the worst slum districts in large American cities. Compared to the rest of the city, population density here soared to 46,000 people per square mile. Streets were narrow, sidewalks non-existent, and open gutters carried wastewater and drainage. Scattered throughout were a few masonry buildings of concrete and rebar, which averaged between 2 to 4 stories. But overall, the area reflected the traditional architecture that dominated so much of Japan. This congested city center was where American war planners placed the bullseye. The aiming point, as seen here in the center, would be the Aoi Bridge. This unique T-shaped structure was chosen since it would be easily recognizable by the bombardier, 31,000 feet overhead. The Enola Gay, named for Paul Tibbets' mother, lifted off at 2:45 a.m. on the morning of August 6. 3 weather planes had taken off an hour earlier to scout cloud cover over Hiroshima and 2 backup cities. But the weather that morning was perfect as the bomber closed in on the city. At 9:15 a.m., the Enola Gay released its payload. 10 seconds passed, then 20 and 30. Little Boy, as the uranium bomb was called, detonated after 43 seconds and just 1,968 feet above the Shima Hospital, a small clinic 550 feet east of the aiming point. Temperatures on the ground below reached 7,200 degrees, hot enough to bubble clay roof tiles, fuse porcelain dishware, and melt coins, sewing needles, and even a bronze Buddha statue. Rescuers sifting through the city's debris would later find a skull with the victim's glasses melted inside the eye cavity. The explosion carbonized people on the streets, leaving charred hands still wrapped around the hanging straps on trains. Organs evaporated and birds vaporized in flight. Survivors inside the city center never even heard the explosion. Quote, we saw blue-white lightning, recalled one 14-year-old survivor. It was like the flash of a camera. That brilliant flash of infrared energy hurtling across the doomed city at the speed of light would leave haunting reminders of the split second when the detonation occurred, including the outline of a person seated on the steps of Sumitomo Bank. The sudden release of so much heat triggered a massive expansion of air, which unleashed a 984 mile per hour blast wave that smashed streetcars, snapped or uprooted trees, and flattened more than 4 square miles, an area that included most of the city's homes, shops, and businesses. Of the city's 76,000 buildings, the explosion and subsequent fires destroyed or damaged a staggering 70,000 of them. Even the steel frames of the city's industrial buildings could not withstand the atomic hurricane, as this close-up photo here clearly demonstrates. Little Boy likewise crippled the city's public services and transportation. The blast toppled utility poles, busted water mains, and wrecked power and gas plants. Quote, it is no exaggeration, as one post-war report observed, to say that the whole city was ruined instantaneously. Survivors stumbled into this apocalypse, past victims whose white teeth stood out in marked contrast to their blackened bodies. Quote, I saw a train stopped on the Aoi Bridge, recalled a 17-year-old survivor. The driver and the passengers, seated and standing both, were completely charred. This is actually one of only 5 photographs shot that day in Hiroshima. The blast had left many naked or in shredded shirts and pants. Glass from blown out windows, coupled with wooden splinters, riddled bodies, gouged out eyes, and sliced open bellies, exposing the intestines. Flash burns tattooed skin, while blisters rose and ruptured on faces and torsos, exposing raw red flesh, leaving the skin to dangle, as one survivor later described, like apple peelings. To prevent the rubbing of raw flesh, survivors walked with arms outstretched, reminiscent, one said, of kangaroos. Naked children cried for parents, while mothers and fathers hollered the names of their missing offspring. Victims crouched in the rubble, pleading for help. Quote, everywhere I looked, remembered one survivor, I saw the most horrible misery. Those who could fled toward the city's many waterways, propelled not only by an incredible thirst, but a need to escape the fires that feasted on the city's wooden debris. The wounded crowded the riverbanks, many with singed hair. Thermal burns prompted bodies and faces to swell so much that people's eyes appeared as slits. Even to loved ones, victims were almost unrecognizable. The attack killed 80,000 people, a figure that in the weeks and months ahead would climb to about 140,000. Post-attack photos of the damage stunned American leaders. Here's a close-up of one of those images. As you can see here, everything is gone. Quote, one peculiarity an American intelligence report noted is that no rubble is visible on hard surface streets. These seem as if swept clean by a terrific wind. Back in Washington, the White House released a statement from Truman, once again calling on Japan to surrender. Refusal to do so, the president warned, would mean, quote, a rain of ruin from the air, the likes of which has never been seen on this earth. But Japanese leaders, cut off from Hiroshima and slow to grasp the calamity, proved too slow to respond. So back on Tinian, a second bomb, this one dubbed Fat Man and made for plutonium, was loaded into the back of the B-29 boxcar. Kokura was the city originally planned for the second atomic mission, but bad weather forced the crew to divert. Quote, destiny, as New York Times reporter William Lawrence observed, chose Nagasaki as the ultimate target. Nagasaki, which had a population of about 230,000 people, was a vital wartime producer. Mitsubishi operated 4 major factories in the city, the largest being the shipyard, which cranked out freighters, destroyers, and light carriers. So dominant was Mitsubishi that 9 out of every 10 city laborers worked for the company. At 11:02 a.m. on August 9th, a second atomic bomb exploded over the Japanese homeland. Unlike Hiroshima, which was a flat and tidal city, Nagasaki's more mountainous topography helped corral and amplify the bomb's blast. So powerful were the atomic winds that in some places it stripped the nearby mountainsides down to the rock. The bombardier aimed at the circular Mitsubishi sports field, which from 6 miles up appeared to him to be a racetrack, and you can see it here on that image. In this photo, you can see that the bomb actually detonated just to the northeast of his aiming point. What's important to note here is how, much like Hiroshima, there's virtually nothing left. This is another image which illustrates the ferocity of the atomic hurricane and subsequent fires, which ultimately destroyed a 2 square mile area. In the end, only a few concrete structures remained. While the mountains helped contain the force of the bomb, the damage was still significant. The bomb destroyed or damaged 18,409 homes, a figure that equated to 1 out of every 3 houses in the city. The 20 neighborhoods within a half-mile radius of the hypocenter were obliterated by the heat and winds. Public utilities, as well as the city's healthcare system, were largely obliterated. Literally 3 out of every 4 doctors and nurses were killed. This is the Urakami Cathedral, which, like in Bako Dome and Hiroshima, would become the iconic building symbolizing the destruction of Nagasaki. The cathedral, located about 500 yards from ground zero, catered to the city's approximately 20,000 Catholics. Artifacts from the destroyed church are on display in Nagasaki museum and at the Hypocenter Park there. So if anybody has a chance to visit there, it's really powerful to go and do that. The human toll from the bombing was significant, though far less than in Hiroshima. The attack initially killed about 40,000 people, a figure that in the weeks and months ahead would rise to about 73,000. The attack did successfully damage or destroy 3 of Mitsubishi's 4 factories, which you can see kind of here in the background there. The attack on Nagasaki followed 1 day after Russia's entry into the war increased the pressure on Japan's leaders. In a meeting of the War Council the night of the attack, which members were split 3-3 on whether to surrender, it fell to Hirohito to at last intervene and cast that tie-breaking vote. Quote, "The time has come," he said, "when we must bear the unbearable." The emperor recorded his speech on a gramophone record. His remarks, which totaled just 625 words when translated, lasted 4.5 minutes. Though he never mentioned the word surrender, his message was clear. Japan had been defeated. Following day at noon, millions of Japanese people bowed and listened for the first time as the voice of the emperor was broadcast over the radio. The war, at last, had ended. And I will conclude that there. Let's see. I can stop sharing. All right.
Great.
All right. So that's a good upbeat talk on a Wednesday night, right, Jim? Leave it to me to come and bring the lighthearted topics.
No, it's like I was, Rampage, then Empire of Snow, or Black Snow, and then Empire of Ashes. I mean, you have 3 stories that have this horrible element to it, but every story of World War II is a horror story, isn't it?
It is. It really is.
Yeah. You can't avoid it, and it's, to me, it's amazing you were able to put that together in about 40 minutes, because there is so much more to this book than can even be said. I mean, I've in the past 30 years, have gone through Feist, have gone through Butoh, these stories about the end of the war, which are very technical, very almost distant views. Whereas with a lot of this book, Jim, it's like you're in the room with these people.
Yeah.
I mean, if you read about, because there is a cast of characters of hundreds of people in this book, Oppenheimer, Groves, Henry Stimson, Truman, Churchill, all of them that are in there. And they do very much come alive with all of this. But I guess the crux, question that I have, and I think most people still have about the atomic bomb, is it was the most humane choice. I mean, you're facing either invasion, which is going to lead to millions of deaths, or blockade, which is going to lead to 15 million or more deaths.
Totally.
From starving all these people. And so it's a hard choice, but like Truman said, he never regretted it, because he knew that it was the way to end it quickly and to save lives.
Yeah, I think Truman looked at it, and I use this analogy kind of like, just to simplify it, like ripping a Band-Aid off. If you do it really fast, it hurts right away. It's going to take some hair, a little bit of skin probably, but it's over. But if you slowly start pulling it back bit by bit by bit, it just hurts and hurts and hurts, and it goes on and on and on, and you just prolong that suffering. And it's an oversimplification, but I really think that's what they were looking at, which is we've got to find a way to hurry up and end this war as quickly as possible. And there was real fear that the atomic bombs alone might not be able to do it. In fact, George Marshall said, hey, we burned 16 square miles of Tokyo in March. We killed 100,000 people. Why is this bomb going to be any different? We subsequently went on to burn the urban areas out of 64 of their cities prior to the atomic bombs. What is it about the atomic bomb that's going to be any different? And really what I think so often is missing in this debate is that there is, at the heart of it all, there's this key difference between defeat and surrender. And the Japanese, in many ways, yes, they were defeated. Their navy had largely been destroyed. Their air force was being converted into kamikazes. They did still have 5 million men under arms, which was a huge force, and that the army was really hoping to be able to use to push back and against the Americans and try to prevent unconditional surrender. So while in many ways they're defeated, surrender is a political decision. You've got to make that choice to raise that white flag. And Japan was nowhere near that point. You had Hirohito and a handful of folks on his war cabinet that were pushing in that direction, but you had a very strong military contingency that wanted to continue this fight, that wanted to get the Americans onto Kyushu, that was hoping that by creating such an awful bloodletting, they would be able to dictate better terms for surrender eventually. And
And,
that's what Truman, I mean, that's what Hirohito was trying to avoid.
well, it's like you just said as well that, will these atomic bombs have an effect? In your book, it shows that Anami and these Umezu and these
Mhm.
elites of Japan, when they have the final discussions, Hiroshima and Nagasaki don't even come up.
Exactly. Yeah.
They
No,
they
it's a, yeah, they're like, they're ready to keep going. I mean, the
did
regime is
they
still
know
intact.
did they know how bad the destruction was? Do you think they had even an because I Hirohito does,
Yeah.
but do they?
They do. Word comes in pretty quickly that Hiroshima has largely been totally
Okay,
destroyed.
okay,
And particularly after Nagasaki happens, they know how bad it is at that point. But you have to remember in Tokyo, their regime, even though 56 square miles of Tokyo have been burned out, their regime is still intact. They're still ready to keep fighting. And again, one of the things that kind of worked in the military's favor is that atomic energy was well known at that point, and people forget that, like, there was basically everybody was pushing to develop atomic weapons. I mean, the Germans were, the Japanese were. I mean, it was a huge race. Uh, Atomic, the energy that lay at the heart of an atom in the late 1930s, early 1940s was the equivalent of AI today. Every physicist was in on it. Everybody was pushing on it. So they all knew. And so the Japanese knew how expensive and how difficult of a challenge it was to develop this. And so one of the arguments that the military was making was, yes, the Americans may have an atomic bomb, but there's no way they have a lot of these things. They may have one or they may have two, but there's that, and we've survived. They've dropped their one, so you know what? Let's keep on fighting, whatnot. The fact that the Americans dropped the second one, so soon after the first one is the most pivotal point in the war. And I'll tell you, and that really comes back down to Kurt LeMay and Leslie Groves. The two of them understood that America needed to. The second bomb was not originally going to be dropped until August 11th, and they said that's just too much time. It's almost a week. You're going to lose the initiative. You've got to get these bombs boom, boom on target. They had no idea that the Japanese were debating, well, the Americans only have one of these things. They didn't know that at the time, but they knew that they had to communicate to the Japanese, bam, bam. By dropping that second bomb 75 hours later, it effectively ruins the whole argument. The Americans don't have more than one of these things or two of these things. The Americans can drop them every other day. They may have 20 of them. They may have 200 of them. And at that point, they may never need to invade. Maybe they sit offshore and just keep dropping atomic bombs. And that's kind of that second bomb is what really gets them over that hurdle. And I don't think Nagasaki gets enough attention. Everybody talks about Hiroshima. Yes, it is the first. Yes, it's more destructive. Yes, it's the beginning of the nuclear age. But it's Nagasaki that really brings an end to the war. And I don't think people appreciate that as much as they should.
Well, I think it goes, and you even say it in there, because so many people today say it was just a warning to the Soviets, but
Yeah.
it really wasn't. Truman wanted to end the war,
Yes.
whether it, had an effect on the Soviets or not. This was his way that he saw to do it.
Totally. And if you go back and that whole argument that this was the Soviets, that's a whole post-war myth. And
Right.
that was a bunch of diplomatic historians trying to kind of insert themselves in this military process and try to make an argument. Truman did not really grasp how bad the Soviets were until very late in the game. I mean, yeah, he takes over as president, and Churchill is sending him all these, messages saying the Iron Curtain's coming down across, Europe at this point. And Truman's like, whatever, it can't be that bad, and he's very slow to grasp what's actually happening. He doesn't really grasp it until Potsdam. And at that point, the decision's really already made,
Yeah.
by that point that he's going to drop the bomb. And also, I mean, if you say, well, Truman was really doing this as a message to the Soviets, you're effectively saying he killed all these, 100,000+ people to send a political message. I mean, that's just not who Harry Truman was. So I've never put much stock in that. I've never put any stock in that. And I'll also add that, yes, the Russians coming into the war certainly does put pressure on the Japanese. But the Japanese very much knew the Russians were coming into the war. The Russians had not re-upped the neutrality agreement in April of that year. The Americans were sending supplies to the Russians, ships, underwear, tuna fish. I mean, in order to get them into the war. The Russians refused a Japanese peace envoy to try to help negotiate it into the war. Like, all the signs were there that the Russians were not going to help the Japanese. We're going to come into the war on the side of the Allies. And then more importantly, you just had to look in the newspaper during Potsdam to see Churchill, Truman, and Stalin all smiling for the papers. It was clear what was going to happen. So I find that whole Russia thing just a big red herring.
Now, when Truman is at Potsdam and he lets know the secret, one of the great comments you have in there is from Winston Churchill, where he says, "This is the second coming of wrath." I mean, I almost wish you had named the book that, because that to me has not left me since I read it, and it is the truth. You've got wrath upon, but this is incinerating everybody, and it's something that's beyond. And then when he tells Stalin knows already because of Klaus Fuchs. And the spy there. So it's unbelievable. Now, do you think in your mind that it is just Hiroshima that convinces Hirohito that he has to end this thing?
Yeah, Hirohito, and there's more documentary evidence this comes out. Hirohito after Hiroshima is pretty much like it's game over. But what happens is stunningly in Japan, they're very slow to meet right after the bombing of Hiroshima. And in fact, news is a little slow coming out. The first real organized rescuers aren't going to get into Hiroshima for about 30 hours. But reports do reach Tokyo that the destruction there is just catastrophic. And so Hirohito, after Hiroshima, tells his political aides, like, this is over. We got to get out of this. But what you see is it's going to take a couple of days to get the Big Six, which is their sort of Supreme War Council, together to be able to have a meeting on this. And that's what's crazy, is just how slow Japanese bureaucracy is to reach that point. And so as a result of that, the second bomb is dropped. But that's going to only reinforce for Hirohito what he already knew, which was that Japan has to get out of this war. And so, but no, for Hirohito, as soon as August 6th, he knew the game was over.
I think that not only the race to get the bomb, but you look around today, it takes 10 years for them to do a road project. Here they build 3 entire cities and schools for 600,000 people within just a couple of years. It's just unbelievable.
It's bonkers, man. It's amazing. And I totally nerded out on it. Like, I drove out to Tennessee and went and saw Oak Ridge. I went through the archives. I read all these memoir and accounts of people who lived there. Like, I nerded out on the Manhattan Project because I'm with you, man. I just find that so fascinating, that like what we were able to accomplish. I mean, because you had to build sewer systems. I mean, it was like, it's not like people think, oh, well, we had to build these atomic cities. It must have just been a few laboratories and factories. Like, no, dude, it was like building Mount Pleasant, South Carolina, like, where I live. Yeah. I mean, we're only 90,000 people here, I mean, they basically built my hometown, and did it in like 9 months. And it's, I mean, schools, hospitals, clinics. I mean, you think about it. I mean, they had to have clubs and social environments. I mean, they had like, one of my favorites was the Cat Fanciers Club. I mean, you literally had a club for cat people. I mean, you had the Model Railroaders Club. I mean, like, they built a fully functioning cities like that. And it's an astonishing thing of like American ingenuity there.
Well, it's kind of like Patton says, there's nothing like war to make people really get moving. And
totally. Yeah, and my favorite, like at Los Alamos, they had a ski slope. I mean,
unbelievable.
I mean, yeah, it totally is. So.
We had a one question come in, and it said, on August 8th, the Soviet Union entered the war against Japan. So why did the Truman administration not wait until some time to see whether Japan would surrender?
As far as like, and I guess I'll try to clarify, I'm wondering if they're thinking, if that question is about why did they wait between the bombs? Because I think we kind of addressed that already.
Yeah.
So I think, I think we kind of covered that one already about that, and also the Soviet Union not being as big of an impact as we thought. So John, I think we covered your question there.
Another one came in and said, that what made you decide to focus on the damage on the ground versus traditional facts that war historians repeat over and over?
Well, I'll tell you, it's interesting. So this book actually grew out of my previous book, Black Snow. And Jim, as I recall, I came up and did a presentation with you guys when Black Snow came out. And so that book looked at the fire raids and what had happened. And I was super fascinated by the fire raids, specifically about the one in March of 1945. And so when I was doing research, I went over to Tokyo. I interviewed a bunch of survivors of that. I got archival material from Tokyo. And while I was over there, I went down to Hiroshima and visited. And through some contacts there, I did some interviews with some survivors. I had a survivor actually give me a personal tour of the whole museum there. And so I got these great, and so in addition to that, I got like great accounts out of the museum there, that had never before been published in English. So I came back and I wrote my first draft of Black Snow, and I had like 10,000 words in it, all just about Hiroshima. And my editor read my first draft of that book, and he very wisely came back to me and said, this material is fascinating and all, but like, it doesn't belong in this book. This is a book about Tokyo and the fire raid on Tokyo. Hiroshima is a totally different story. Like, let's pull that out and save that for another project. And that was the wise decision. So when we finished Black Snow, kind of came back and said, all right, now let's dig back in. Let's take the same approach we did with Black Snow and do it with the atomic bombs. So I went back to Japan. I visited, Hiroshima again, Nagasaki. I got more accounts. I did that. And, and really and at that point too, when you're looking at not just the actual tactical missions against those two cities, then at that point, we sort of pulled that lens back further and looked at, okay, this is really the crux of the war. This is where it's either going to end or it's not going to end. So let's look at the politics of war termination. What's going on with Truman? What's going on with Hirohito? When you reach this calamitous moment. And so the story just kind of grew right out of there. So in a lot of ways, I think Black Snow and Empire of Ashes are really go together.
Most definitely. Yes,
they do. And so, and when I found that, and I don't think people look closely enough and understand that the fire raids are a part of the atomic missions. I mean, this is America's increasing, rise to sort of the zenith of total war with atomic warfare. Because you have to remember, when we start bombing in November of 1944, it's all high altitude daylight precision bombing. We're going after aircraft factories and steel mills. We are not going after civilians. We are not going after cities. And then all of that changes in early 45. And it changes as we move into the fire raids. And, there's real fear. How's the American public going to respond to these raids, particularly after the March one? So the Pentagon is very carefully monitoring editorial pages. What are the opinion page writers saying? What is going on in the congressional record? What are lawmakers saying? What are the radio broadcasters saying? And what they find is that there is no pushback to the switch from from precision bombing to fire bombing. And then you see LeMay just takes that as this green light, starts burning all the cities, and that just brings you right into the atomic missions in August. And so it's a very fast process, but it is. And the atomic bombs really represent that just zenith of total war. There's nothing else like it in World War II. I mean, it is the epitome of it. And so that's kind of where these two books, in a lot of ways, just they go together so well. And in a lot of ways, the research was all done simultaneously. I was already researching Empire of Ashes while I was doing Black Snow, and then I kind of went back to the archives, made some more trips and things like that. But in general, the two very much go together.
Do you think after the bombs were dropped that it changes, though, the way the people's perspective kind of shifts? Because, you even point out that Tibbets, Sweeney, they have their own family members, that are like, how can you live with yourself, after this? And it's just like, good grief, what do I got to do?
Yeah, I think initially, and Gallup does a poll in like late August, early September of American public, and 85% of the American public absolutely supports the atomic bombs. In fact, there's the Boston Globe has one of their columnists has this quip. He says, 2 bombs for $2 billion, that's a deal. And what you see is that part of that, I think, is wrapped up in that just euphoria of the war's over. Yeah. Like it took whatever it took to end, because, at this point, people don't forget that, like, what it was like in America at that point. I mean, 96 cents of every federal dollar was going to the war or the debt service. I mean, we were enlisting almost 150,000 new troops every month. We were moving European forces to the Pacific. There was every thought that this thing was going to go on, and people were exhausted by it. and they're ready for it to be over. So I think some of those early poll numbers really reflect that just euphoria of the war being over. It's not until John Hershey's book comes out in 46 that you begin to see that pendulum swing a bit. And Hershey's really the first one to sort of give voice to the Japanese civilians,
Right.
you know, and to the New Yorker's credit, you know, they ran the entire magazine with just that issue, no advertisements. They turned it over to newspapers that wanted to serialize it. And that's for the Americans. It's really the first time I think they get a glimpse of what it was like for the Japanese. It's that you begin, and of course, at that point, the war's been over for a while. People have relaxed. They're more open to what it was like to understand that. And so you really begin to see the pendulum begin to swing. The majority of Americans, even to this day, still support the use of the atomic bomb, but you do begin to see that softening from 85% of it. And so what I was trying to do when I did this book is, you know, I spent a lot of time in Japan. I was an English teacher there in the 1990s. I go back to Japan a lot. I've got great friends over there. I really wanted to capture and lay out both sides. You know, so often history looks at just the American side, and I'll be honest, it's easier because doing research in Japan is really hard. I mean, not a lot of Americans speak Japanese. Hiring Japanese translators is expensive. I mean, getting Japanese records out of archives and museums is challenging. But we live in an era where people expect that. And I'll credit my dear friend John Parshall for that. You know, John Parshall was really, I think, at the forefront of this with his book Shattered Sword 2 decades ago, when they really got at the heart of the Japanese story of Midway. Mm-hmm. And in fact, and I was at the time that book had come out, I was actually selling my book on the Doolittle raids. And I remember my editor using John Parshall as an example and saying, you know, readers expect this now. You know, we're 7 decades out, now we're 8. You know, you can't just tell one side of the story. And that's right. And, you know, and I'm in a unique position that I spend a lot of time in Japan. I lead tours over there. So I've got contacts. I have access. I can, you know, I go to Hiroshima and Nagasaki every year. You know, I get, you know, and that's when I take tours over there, we meet with survivors. And so our guests get to meet them and get to hear those things firsthand, which is always one of the most powerful points of any of these tours. But so I really, going back to that, I wanted to have that full story. I wanted everything, the minute detail from the American side, and I wanted the same thing for the Japanese side.
Well, you went to Tinian and the Marianas this past year as well.
Oh yeah. Look, I've got, this is actually a piece here, Jim, of Runway Able, which Runway Able, of course, is the runway on Tinian where Enola Gay and Boxcar took off of. And you can see it has, if I can get up here, it's made from coral. And that's the coral that they blasted on the island. And then on the flip side, you can actually see some of the asphalt and whatnot. So you can kind of see the variation there.
Wow.
Now, and I love it. So I go to Tinian. I've been to Tinian many times. We normally take guests there about once a year. Tinian, the runway there is now being resurfaced by the Air Force. The Air Force is bringing those runways back into use in case of a future conflict or need. And so they're paving over Runway Able. So when I was back there, which I don't like that. I think I look at it like a primary source. And I think you and I are simpatico on that it's a piece of history, but the Air Force sees it as, we need it as an airfield. So when I was over there in March, I took like, you know, you could see the pavers where they're coming down there. I was like, just took a bunch of rocks in a bag and took them back. I was like, before this stuff gets buried, I'm going to get some of these artifacts.
Have they filled in the nuke pits there?
They're using new pits. I think they're some of the pits are still back in the jungles and stuff like that. They're I think they've been blasting some of the new pits and stuff. But I got a whole tour of it back there, which is it's nuts.
Wow.
Oh, dude, I've got one other thing I'll show you here. So this is actually a 1945 bottle. Some of the Air Force guys I had lunch with there were found a old trash pile back in the woods. It was filled with old Coca-Cola bottles. And so they gave me one of them.
Oh man.
So this one has on the bottom of it, I can hold up there, 45. And that was the year it was done. So
it's good to be the king.
And look, man, hey, the Air Force these days, like, they're just bulldozing it all. So it's like, you know, they're like, if you don't take it, it's just going to end up shattered and, you know, crunched under by some bulldozer. So I grabbed it. So,
well, that, you know, this is amazing, and it shows to the lengths that you go to. I mean, you know, we don't have a lot on, you know, your story here, but you came here and looked at everything we had just to make sure there wasn't
totally
there. Totally. And so, no, that's what makes it great. We had another question come in. How many bombs were ready or close to being ready to be dropped after the first two? Could we have
That's a
kept up
great,
the atomic destruction?
great question. Absolutely not. We could not have. The third bomb was not going to be ready until about August 24th. And then we maybe would have about half dozen more by the end of 1945. So we really, that whole idea of doing this, seizing the initiative, boom, 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 simply wasn't going to happen. So you would have gone August 6th, August 9th, August 24th.
So only one more. Only one more.
Yeah, that was that, and that was Hap Arnold and the Manhattan Project guys wanted that for Tokyo. I mean, they were already calling where that one was going to go, and so, but we didn't. We really did not have a pipeline of these things coming in, and it was going to take a while. So that's where that whole back-to-back usage of the first two ends up being such a pivotal decision.
And you said after the second one that then it becomes Truman's decision. It's no longer a military decision.
Yes.
It's under his discretion.
Yeah, Truman, you know, when he gives the order, I don't think he realized that the Air Force took it and said, all right, we'll just start dropping them. And so after the first two, he's like, whoa, okay, now, like, this is a lot of destruction, you know? And Truman was, I mean, he's a good dude in his heart. I mean, he's a nice guy, you know? He's a father. He's got a really tight family, and he doesn't want to visit unnecessary casualties on people. And so he gives the order. He says, look, no more without my express approval. So if we get that third one, like, we're gonna have to sit down and have a little chat about this before we use it. And so he puts the brakes on it at that point. So
yeah,
but I think that, you know, it speaks to who he was as an individual.
No, that's one of the things that came out of this was just, you know, how grounded he really was and a very rational person. And even though he makes mistakes, he's trying to make the honest, you know, choice in a lot of these things. And I gained a lot of respect for him.
Same.
Another question that came in is when does Nimitz, Eisenhower, and MacArthur learn about these bombs? Is MacArthur the last one to know about the bomb?
No, you know, in MacArthur, it's always a little hard to kind of read on exactly when MacArthur learns, because, you know, MacArthur kind of tells his own story after the war,
right?
Which is, and Jim, you know that better than anybody. You know,
it's the truth.
It's the truth. You know, like, it's kind of hard to gauge. He was given the heads up on it. I mean, he's going to be Supreme Allied Commander, so he is given the heads up on it. I can't remember on Eisenhower and Nimitz exactly when they learned. I mean, this was such a tight kept thing, and this was largely being run by LeMay and Groves that I don't think they were given a courtesy heads up. I could be wrong on that. I'll be honest, I didn't delve too deeply into the Nimitz Eisenhower connection on that. Because it didn't come up in any of the documentation.
Well, I know Farrell comes out there, and Farrell's a very big part of the Manhattan Project. You
totally,
know?
Yeah. He's Groves number 2. Yeah,
right, exactly. And you know, he'll come out there in you know, I think late July and tell MacArthur about what is going on.
Yeah.
So it's the thing, like you just said, it's such a secret, and 600,000 people work on this thing, and the secret doesn't get out. You know, I mean, you've got some guys in there, but, you know, unbelievable.
But, you know, Groves was really adamant about compartmentalization. He's like, you know, if you know, your job is to make this widget, that's it. That's all you know is that widget. And it's interesting, when I was reading the accounts, and I like I said, I nerded out on the Manhattan Projects. I got all these memoirs of people who'd lived there, personal papers and things like that, and letters, and they really had a culture where, like, even when they were doing, like, if you were at the baseball game at Hanford, you weren't like, so, hey, Jim, you know, what are you guys working on over in your factory there? I mean, you know, like, you just didn't talk about work. Like, they really, like, had that kind of, people were browbeat about that. So they didn't do it. It was, you know, you talked about balls and strikes, but you didn't talk about office stuff.
And if they did, they were probably gone.
Yeah.
Immediately. Yeah. Very amazing. Let's see. I think, you know, that this kind of hits it. It's a great book. I wish you the best of success with this. I know you've got some other things coming up now. And the one thing I wanted to say, that this book was your dissertation for your doctoral program. Is that correct?
It still is.
Yes.
The dissertation is not yet done.
The book is in print, but we're still waiting. So the next time we address you, it will be as Dr. Scott.
Yeah, it's most people write the dissertation first and then convert it into a book.
Right.
But I have a mortgage to pay, so I don't have that luxury. So I've got to write the book and then do the opposite. So I've got to go back. It's funny. I did my master's at the Citadel, and one of my advisor there says that I was having lunch with him not too long ago and telling him about this. And he says, "So your job now is to go back to your book and take all the fun out of it." And he says, "That's all you do. Take all the fun out of it, and it'll be and you'll have your dissertation." So
awesome. Well, I think it's #1 on Amazon right now.
It's been selling great, knock on wood, and Amazon picked it as a book of the month, and LA Times picked it as one of the books of the month. So I would
no, it's really great. And like I said to you before, after studying these people for 30 years, reading this book, I felt like I was at Disney's Hall of Presidents, and all these characters stood up and talked. I was like, "Oh, that's the way he talks. Oh, that's how he moves. Oh, that's why he's so big." So to me, it was great fun and really a great book. And we're so appreciative for you being here, and we wish you all success.
Awesome, Jim. Thanks so much. I always love to, you guys are the best to me. I so appreciate everything you and the whole gang at the MacArthur Memorial do. So fantastic museum, fantastic archives, fantastic people there. So thank you guys.
Thank you, everybody. And thanks for joining us. And hopefully we'll have Jim back for the next round, wherever he goes from here. So thanks all for being.
Thank you.